Here we're going to show you how to install the impactor assembly into the CIRT. For this we're going to need, of course, completed impactor assembly, handy dandy pin wrench, which is included with the CIRT, also the guide sleeve, the foot, the 2 reset shoulder bolts, and the 6 socket head screws that hold the foot in place. We also need Allen keys for installing those screws. All right, the first step is we're going to take our impactor assembly and, supporting the end nut where all the weight is, we're going to gently insert into the chamber. Now, you'll see me wiggling it. What I'm trying to do is get the ring at the piston head to compress. This can sometimes be a little tricky, but once you're in place, it should slide in smoothly. As you can see, the entire assembly is sliding up nicely. Do not force that that initial installation, otherwise you can cause mars to the inside of the chamber. We want to start with the end nut slightly out. The reason is we need to line up the holes on our reset collar. That's our next step. You want to begin by examining your shoulder bolts. Loctite can sometimes build up on these shoulder bolts after they've been installed and reinstalled several times, so it's a good idea to take a small wire brush and just clean them off gently, and maybe take a paper towel and make sure they're wiped clean. Do that to both shoulder bolts. Now we need to line up 3 different holes to properly install the shoulder bolt. You have the threaded hole in the reset collar, you have the hole through the chamber, and then you have the hole in the reset handle itself. If you install this bolt with the reset handle backward, now this reset handle is not engaging the reset collar and it won't function correctly. So we'll slide this collar, and you may have to lift the head gently so that it can get past the threads. And you'll have to look down there and try to line all those holes up. As long as the reset handle is all the way forward, you should be good there. And all you'll have to do is align the reset collar inside the chamber. All right, that looks good. I'm now going to apply 1 drop of the blue Loctite to the threads of each of the shoulder bolt as I install it. Only use a small amount, basically 1 drop on each screw. Too much Loctite can make disassembly at a later period very difficult. You'll need a hex key to install these. I believe it's a 1/4 inch hex key. A standard L key will work, but we've found that a longer tool like the one I'm using here is usually best. All right. You'll sometimes need to reach into the chamber and adjust the reset collar slightly as you're trying to install the screw, but once you're threaded in, you should be good. All right, so now I'm threaded in. I do not want to tighten this all the way down yet. So we'll put 1 drop of blue Loctite on other, and now that internal collar should be fairly well lined up, and it should be quite a bit easier to install the second bolt. Again, I'm going to make sure my reset handle is all the way down. Now, something which can happen is if the reset handle is slightly misaligned, the bolt will bind on the hole in the reset handle. So if it feels like the bolt is binding at any point, check your alignment of your reset handle. So we do want to torque these down quite firmly. But again, I want to warn you about over torquing. Certainly no more than what you can apply with a small tool like this. All right, now's a good idea to check that both handles are engaging the reset collar, and you can visually see, if I look down the chamber, I can visually see that moving the handles are moving the reset collar. So now we're going to install the end nut. It's very important that these threads be clean. So it's a good idea to take a rag or paper towel and wipe any debris off of the threads, both the exterior threads and the interior threads. If you see excessive Loctite or Loctite buildup on these threads, touch it with a light wire brush to help get that off. And again, make sure you get all of that debris out. We are going to install blue Loctite again on these threads. My convention is 4 drops on the second thread in. I'm going to rotate, another drop, rotate a quarter turn, and a drop, and rotate, and drop. So that's 4 drops of blue Loctite on the end nut. As with all the other threads that we're installing with Loctite, be careful not to use too much because it can cause problems later. Oh, another note is you will need, I didn't realize this, you will need the bolt at the back of the chamber open for this entire process. I should have mentioned that earlier. If the bolt is closed, it will be very, very difficult to get the piston head up into the chamber because you'll be fighting the compression of gas that's in the chamber. All right, now we're ready to thread the end nut in. And this should just thread in by hand. If while you're threading this in, you find it galling or hanging up, snagging on something, stop, remove the end nut, see if you can identify what's causing that. It more than likely will not cause a functionality problem, but it may make removing the end nut at a later date extremely difficult. Now we want to tighten the end nut down. The end nut is receiving all of the force of our projectile when the piston comes down. So this needs to be seated quite firmly. So we take our end nut, or our pin wrench, and again there are 4 holes around the end nut. Choose one that will allow you to apply pressure downward, and that way it's a little easier to apply the torque you need. It may also be a good idea at this point to have somebody else help you brace the CIRT tool so you can get good torque on it, but this can be done with a single individual. So once you've seated as firmly as you can by hand, take your mallet and strike 1, 2. Now those are fairly firm blows, but you'll notice I'm not coming down with full force. You want the end nut seated very firmly, but again, we don't want to over torque it. It will make removal at a later date very difficult. The next step is to install our guide collar. Just with the end nut, you want to take a quick examination of the threads and make sure there's no debris there. We recommend that these threads be installed with anti-seize on the threads. Try to avoid using too much. The amount of anti-seize you're seeing here is about correct. That actually might be slightly heavy, but we'll go ahead and do it. And this is simply thread in by hand. Again, with the end nut, if it's hanging up or galling at any point, stop, back it out, examine the threads. You don't want to have this hanging up on you and cause disassembly to be difficult later. Once it's hand tight, take your pin wrench again. There's 2 holes. This collar does not need to be seated as tightly as the end nut because it is not receiving, it's not accepting nearly the same amount of force as the end nut is, but we do want it on there firmly. So 1 light tap and you should be good. The last step is installing the foot. This just slides over the guide collar and end nut. There are 6 holes in the casing of the CIRT and 6 holes. You'll need an Allen key. Oh, and I almost forgot. We want to install these with, once again, 1 drop of blue Loctite. And I know I've said it several times before, but I'll reiterate, be careful not to use too much Loctite, as this can cause problems with disassembly down the road. Just like every other mechanical assembly, it's usually best to get all of your screws threaded in so that there's still play in the entire assembly. All right, now that all 6 screws are in place, take our key, seat all 6. And then go back and make sure they're all snug, tight. These only need to be hand tight. They should not be over torqued. And there you go.